I have told this story maybe 4 times in my whole life. Not because I forget it. I could never forget it. I tell it so rarely because every time I open my mouth, I feel like I am handing a stranger something that belongs to a dead man, and I am not sure I have the right. But I am old now. Older than Sarek was that day, which is a strange thing to say because that day he looked like the oldest living thing I had ever seen. And there is nobody left who was in that hall. Nobody who breathes. I checked. I am the last one who heard him say it, and if I take it with me, then it is gone, and the galaxy goes back to believing the comfortable lie. So listen. I was young. I want you to hold on to that because it explains a lot of what I thought back then. I thought I understood war. I had grown up on the recordings the way all of us did. Every child of the conquered watched the Meridian footage in school. The human ships coming out of the dark. The way they moved. We were taught one word for humanity before we were taught almost anything else, and that word was butcher. I believed it. Why wouldn't I? My own grandmother's world was gone, not damaged, not occupied. Gone, a ring of dust where a green place used to be. I grew up looking at the sky where her home should have been, and I hated humans the way you hate the dark when you are small. Completely. Without needing a reason beyond the fact that it was there. That was the version of the war I carried into the Hall of Records, the morning Sarek Voss came to testify. Let me tell you about the hall, because you have to see it to understand how big the silence became later. It was carved into the underside of the moon we called Ossing. The whole moon was hollow, old mining tunnels, from back when the conquered still dug for anything worth digging. The hall was the largest empty space we had, and when they built the memorial archive they put it there because there was no sky to look up at and be distracted. Just black rock overhead, polished smooth, with thin veins of light running through it like the roots of some buried tree. Cold. It was always cold in there. Your breath fogged if you spoke too much. The floor was a single sheet of dark glass, and underneath the glass, all the way down, were the names. 60 million of them. Every conquered soldier and civilian lost in the Meridian War, etched into the layers so that when you walked over the dead. You could look down between your own feet and see a name you would never say out loud passing under your boot. People whispered in there without being told to. You just did. Around the edges of the hall stood the machines. I remember the machines so clearly. Tall witness columns, taller than any of us, each one a memory engine that could take a testimony and thread it into the permanent record, not just the words, but the truth of the words. You cannot lie to a witness column. It reads the water in you, the heat, the small betrayals of the body. If your mouth says one thing and your blood says another, the column marks it, and the mark goes into the record forever, in red for all time. That is why testimony in the Hall of Records mattered. That is why it was law. In that room, you could not lie, and everyone knew you could not lie, and so whatever was said there became true in a way that ordinary words never do. I was a clerk, the lowest thing there was. My job that morning was to make sure the third witness column had power, and to fetch water for anyone who asked and to otherwise be invisible, which I was very good at, being young and small and full of a hatred I thought was righteousness. The hall was full. That never happened. Testimonies were usually attended by 3 archivists and a board magistrate. But word had gone out that Sarek Voss was coming, and Sarek Voss was the last one. The last conquered soldier who had stood on a battlefield across from living humans and walked off it. Every other veteran of the Meridian War had died of age, of wounds, of the slow rot that the human weapons left in the body. Sarek had outlived them all. He was 190 of our years old. He should not have been able to walk. And there was a second reason the hall was full, though nobody said it out loud. Sarek had never testified before. In 70 years he had refused. He had been asked, ordered, begged, offered money and quiet and honor, and every time he had said no. Whatever he had seen out there, he had kept it behind his teeth for 70 years. And now, dying, he had changed his mind. You can imagine the appetite in that room. We all thought we knew what he was going to give us. We thought he was going to hand us proof. The final, unassailable, column-verified proof of what the butchers had done. We were going to hear from the last mouth that could still say it, and then that mouth would close forever, and we would have our monster preserved in glass for the next 1,000 years. I wanted that. Ancestors, forgive me. I wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything. They brought him in slowly. I had expected a wreck. He was not a wreck. That was the first thing that unsettled me, though I could not have told you why at the time. He was thin the way old trees are thin. All the soft parts burned away, only the structure left, and the structure was hard. He walked with a cane made from a length of hull metal. I found out later it was cut from the ship he'd served on, the last piece of it that survived, and he did not lean on it so much as tap the floor with it. Once every few steps, like he was checking the ground was still there. His skin was the gray of old ash. Our people go gray when we age past a certain point. It is normal, but on him it looked less like age and more like something that had passed through fire and come out the color of what fire leaves. One of his eyes was clouded white. The other was very, very clear. He had scars, of course. Everyone from that war had scars, but his were the wrong kind. I mean that literally. I had studied the war. I knew what human weapons did to our bodies. The plasma burns, the fragmentation, the way the pulse rounds cooked you from inside. Sarek had none of those. His scars were small and clean and mostly on his hands, like a man who had worked with his hands his whole life. Like a builder, not a soldier. I noticed that. I did not know what to do with it, so I put it aside. They sat him in the witness seat in the center of the glass floor over the names, and the third column, my column, hummed as it woke and turned its long face toward him. The magistrate that day was an old woman named Ohul, very proper, very cold. She read the formula. She asked him to state his name and his war and his rank. Sarek Voss, he said. His voice surprised me. It was quiet, but it filled the whole hall because the whole hall was holding its breath. Meridian War. I was a bridge gunner on the Talon of Sesh, and after she died I was infantry on the ground at Kellett's Reach, and at the Spill, and at the last place, the place we do not have a name for. The column glowed steady green, every word true. Ohul asked him why he had come now. Why after 70 years? Sarek was quiet for a long moment, long enough that people shifted, long enough that I saw his clear eye travel down through the glass into the names underneath his own feet. He was looking at someone. I am sure of it. There was a name down there he had come to stand over. Because when I die, he said, the last living memory of what actually happened dies with me. And I have decided I would rather be hated for the truth than loved for the lie. The column glowed green, and a little thread of unease went through the hall, because that was not how the story was supposed to start. Hated for the truth. We were the ones who were supposed to hate. We had come to be handed our hatred, gift-wrapped and column-verified. Why would telling the truth about the butchers make him hated? Nobody understood yet. I certainly didn't. Magistrate Ohul, to her credit, did not flinch. She asked the first real question. She asked him to describe the enemy, to describe humanity as he had encountered it. And Sarek Voss looked at her with his one clear eye, and he said, "You want me to describe the monsters?" "I want you to describe what you saw," Ohul said. "They are not the same thing," Sarek said. "That's the whole problem, that's why I came." He started at the beginning. I will try to give it to you the way he gave it to us, though I cannot give you his voice, and his voice was half of it. He told us about the Talon of Sesh first. His ship. He talked about her the way you talk about a person, and I remember thinking that was sad, an old soldier confusing a machine with a friend, and I remember being ashamed of that thought about 40 minutes later. The Talon was part of the 9th Line, the fleet that met the human advance at the Meridian Belt, that field of broken worlds and frozen gas that gave the whole war its name. This was the 3rd year. By the 3rd year, Sarek said, the conquered already knew we were losing. not fast. Slowly, humanity did not roll over us the way the recordings suggest. They came steadily, world by world, and they did not stop, and not stopping turned out to be the most frightening thing about them. You have to understand what we expected, Sarek said. We had fought other species, the Dra, the Hollow Fleet, the silica things from the far arm whose name I never learned, and every war before humanity ran the same shape. You fight, you bleed each other, and then one side will breaks and that side runs, and you either let them run or you chase them and it ends. That is what war is. Two peoples testing which one wants it more until one of them stops wanting it. He leaned forward on his hull metal cane. Humans never stopped wanting it. That was the first horror. Not their weapons, not their ships, their refusal. We would break them, we did break them again and again. We won engagements you have never been told about, and it would not matter. We would shatter a human line and the survivors would fall back and dig in, and they would still be there in the morning, fewer, and they would come again. We killed them at rates that would have ended any other war in a season, and they kept coming, and after a while my crewmates stopped celebrating the kills. Because a kill is only worth something if it brings the end closer, and ours didn't. We would win and win and win, and the end got further away every time, and there is a particular kind of terror in that, in winning and feeling yourself lose. The column glowed green through all of it, steady, unbroken. I felt the first crack in myself right there, because this was already not the story I knew. In the story I knew, humans were an unstoppable tide and we were the brave, doomed defenders. But Sarek was saying we won the battles. He was saying we killed them in droves. That did not fit the monster. Monsters do not lose. Monsters do not need to keep coming back fewer than before. Sarek talked about the Talon's death then. It was quick, the way he told it. A human ship smaller than the Talon, he was careful to say, always smaller, always fewer, always outgunned, and it never seemed to matter, put 3 rounds through her spine and she folded. He was on the bridge. The bridge was the only part that held. He watched the rest of his ship, 4,000 of his people, come apart around him in the dark, and then the human ship did something he did not understand for years. It stopped firing. The Talon was dead, broken-backed, venting, drifting. Still, by the laws of the war Sarek knew, you finish a dead ship. You make sure. You do not leave enemies alive behind you to be repaired and returned. That was doctrine. That was sense. Every commander in the Conquered would have finished her. The human ship did not finish her. It came in close, close enough that Sarek, floating in the wreck of his bridge, could see it through the shattered port, could see the small human figures moving behind their own viewports, and it launched something. Not a weapon. Pods. Rescue pods, empty ones, dozens of them, fired into the wreck of the Talon. They gave us their lifeboats, Sarek said. The hall was silent. I did not understand. None of us understood. We thought it was a trick. Some of my crew refused to board them, sure it was a trap, and they died in the dark instead, and I do not blame them because I almost died with them out of the same certainty. But I was young and I was frightened and I wanted to live, and I got into a human lifeboat that a human ship had fired into the corpse of the ship. I was trying to kill it with, and it kept me alive for 6 days until a Conquered tender found me. He held up his scarred hands. The burns on my hands are from the Talon, from pulling my crewmates toward the pods through a fire. 11 of them lived because of those pods. 11 of my people are alive today, have children today, because a human ship that had every reason to kill me instead gave me a boat. The clear eye came up and found the magistrate. Tell me, Sarek said very softly, what kind of monster does that? Ohul did not answer. It was not a question that wanted an answer. The column glowed green. And I stood there by my machine with a cup of water going warm in my hand, and I felt the ground I had stood on my whole life start, very quietly, to move. He could have stopped there. Part of me even now wishes he had. If he had stopped there, it would have been a strange, uncomfortable story about one act of mercy, and we could have called it a fluke, a single soft-hearted human captain, and gone home with the monster mostly intact. But Sarek had not walked into that hall to complicate the monster. He had come to bury it, and he was only getting started. He told us about Kellett's Reach next. After the Talon died, they made him infantry. There were not enough ships left, but there was always more ground to hold, and ground needs bodies. Kellett's Reach was a moon, an ugly place, he said, all red dust and standing rock, no air, everyone in suits, the kind of place nobody would fight over except that it sat on a line between two jump points, and so both sides bled themselves white for it for 11 months. This is where he learned what human war actually was, up close, on the ground, where you can see the enemy's face through the glass of their helmet. On a ship you never see them, he said. You kill a ship, you kill 4,000 people you never met. On the ground it is different. On the ground you learn things about them. And what I learned at Kellett's Reach broke something in me that has never healed, and I want you to understand it was not their cruelty that broke me. I could have survived their cruelty. It was the other thing. He described the trenches. Both sides dug into the red rock, close enough in some places that you could hear the enemy through the ground. And in the long stretches between the assaults, and there were long stretches, war is mostly waiting, strange things started to happen. The humans sang. That was the first thing. In the quiet, across the dead ground, the conquered soldiers would hear the humans singing in their trenches, not war songs. Sarek learned some of the words later, and they were not about killing. They were about home, about women and rain and children and the ordinary business of being alive somewhere far away. The humans sang about the lives they had left to come to this red rock and die, and the conquered soldiers, who did not sing, who had never sung, lay in their own trenches and listened, and something happened to them that no commander had planned for. We stopped being able to not see them, Sarek said. That is the danger. That is why good armies keep you far from the enemy, because if you get close enough for long enough, you start to see that the thing across from you is exactly what you are. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it, and then every kill costs more than it used to. There was an incident he told about, and this is the one that got the whole haul. I have never in my life heard so many people go so quiet at once. There was a stretch on Kellett's Reach, the 9th month, the worst month, the food short on both sides, where a conquered soldier in Sarek's unit, a young one named Vesa, got hit crossing open ground and went down between the trenches. Not dead, wounded. Her suit was punctured and she was losing air, and she lay out there in the red dust in the killing ground where nobody could reach her, screaming into her radio for someone to come, and nobody could come, because the moment you stood up in that ground you died. Her own side could not reach her. Sarek tried. He got 2 meters out of the trench, and the human fire drove him back, and he lay there listening to Vesa die slowly on the open channel, listening to a girl he had trained with beg, and then pray, and then just cry. And there was nothing he could do. And then the human fire stopped. The whole line of it, down the entire human trench, the guns went quiet. And a single human climbed up out of the enemy trench. Unarmored past the suit, no weapon, hands up and open where everyone could see them. And this human walked slowly across the killing ground that had murdered anyone who crossed it for 9 months, out to where Vesa lay dying, and knelt down, and sealed her suit breach with a patch from their own kit, and got an air line into her, and then picked her up. Picked up an enemy soldier, a soldier whose people had spent 9 months trying to kill this human's people, and carried her not back to the human side, back toward Sarek's trench, toward the conquered line. Carried a wounded enemy home to her own people, across open ground, with 60 conquered guns aimed at their unarmored back, trusting that we would not fire. And we did not fire, Sarek said. His voice cracked for the first time, just once. Ancestors help us, not one of us fired. We watched a human carry Vesa to the lip of our trench and lay her down as gentle as you'd lay down a sleeping child, And then this human stood up and looked at us. I was 3 meters away. I saw the face. I will see that face when I die, and did not say anything because we did not share a language yet. Just looked at us. And then turned around and walked back across the killing ground to their own trench, slow, hands still open, and climbed down into it. And a moment later the war started again. The guns opened up, as if none of it had happened. He stopped. He looked down through the glass at the names. "Vesa is down there," he said, "under this floor. She lived 4 more days, and then a shell got the whole medical dugout, human and conquered alike, everyone in it. And so in the end the war took her anyway. But she had 4 more days because an enemy carried her home. 4 more days. I have spent 70 years trying to understand a people who will cross a killing ground to save one wounded girl, and then, an hour later, level a medical dugout with everyone in it. And I am going to tell you the answer because I finally have it, and it is the reason I came, and it is the thing I have been afraid to say for 70 years. The hall did not breathe. My column glowed green, every word true. "It is not that they are monsters," Sarek said. "You could survive monsters. It is that they are exactly, precisely, unbearably like us, and they went to war anyway, knowing, that is the horror, not that they do not see us, that they do." I need to stop the story here for a moment and tell you what was happening in the hall, because the story of Sarek is only half the story. The other half is what he did to the people listening. By this point some people were leaving. I want to be honest about that. Not many. A few. They stood up in the middle of his testimony and they walked out, and their faces were hard, and I understood them completely, because they had come for the same thing I had come for, and he was taking it away from them. And there is a kind of person who would rather leave than have their hatred taken away. Their hatred was load-bearing. You pull it out and the whole structure of them comes down. So they left to keep it. But most stayed. Most stayed and got very still, and I watched something happen to their faces that I have only ever seen that one time. I watched a room full of people who had come to have a belief confirmed slowly realize it was being dismantled, brick by verified brick, and be unable to look away because the thing dismantling it was the one thing none of us could argue with. The column. The green light. He could not be lying. The machine that reads the water in you said so. Everything he said was true, and everything he said was the opposite of everything we knew, and both of those things could not survive in the same skull, and you could watch, in real time, people's faces as one of the two started to die. I felt it in myself. It was not pleasant, I want you to know that. Learning the truth is sold to the young as a good feeling, a bright feeling, and it is not. It is the ground going out from under you. My grandmother's world was still a ring of dust. That was still true. The humans had still killed 60 million of us. The names were still under my feet. None of that changed. What changed was the shape of it, and the shape was so much worse than the monster, because the monster had let me off the hook. If they were monsters, then the war was simple. Good and evil, us and the dark. But if they were people who sang about home, who carried our wounded, who gave us their lifeboats, then the war was not a war against monsters. It was a war between two peoples who were exactly the same, and both of us had done it anyway, and there was no comfort anywhere in that. None. It just hurt all the way down. Magistrate Ohul, I saw, had put one hand flat on the table in front of her, steadying herself, I think. She was old enough to have lost people in the war too. Everyone that age was. "Continue," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. And Sarek continued, because he was not finished, because the worst was still coming. He had been building, this whole time, toward one thing, and I did not see it coming. And when it came, it went through the hall like a wave and left not one of us standing where we had been. He told us about the last place, the place we do not have a name for. The war was in its 9th year by then. Both sides were gutted. The conquered had lost most of its fleet and most of its worlds. Humanity had lost more soldiers than we could count, though we never seemed to be able to make them lose enough to quit. The war had ground down into something without shape, a slow mutual dying, and everyone on both sides was so tired, Sarek said, so tired that the tiredness itself had become a kind of enemy. And then the conquered found the weapon. I had never heard this part, none of us had. It was not in the recordings. It was not in the histories. Sarek was the only one alive who knew it, and he told us, and I understood in that moment why he had waited 70 years, and why he had needed to be dying before he could say it. The conquered High Command found a way to end the war, a real way, not a battle and ending. They had developed in secret in the 9th year a weapon that struck at the human homeworlds directly, not the fleets, not the soldiers, the homeworlds, the place all those human songs were about. And the weapon was ready, and the fleet to carry it was assembled, and Sarek, infantry now, a veteran, one of the few left who had survived from the start, was assigned to the boarding force that would go in behind it and hold what was left. We were going to do to them, Sarek said, and his voice was flat now, all the way flat, what they never once did to us. The hall made a sound, a collective involuntary sound, because we knew, every child of the conquered knew, that humanity had never struck our homeworlds. My grandmother's world, the Ring of Dust, had been a military world, a shipyard, a legitimate target by any law of war. In 9 years, across 1,000 engagements, humanity had killed our soldiers and broken our fleets and taken our military worlds, and they had never, not once, gone for the places where our children were. We had assumed it was weakness, or that they could not reach. It had never occurred to any of us that it might have been a choice. It was a choice, Sarek said, reading the room. I know that now. I learned it in the last place. Let me tell you what happened in the last place. The fleet went in. Sarek's fleet, carrying the weapon that would end the human homeworlds and end the war. And humanity, outnumbered here for once because we had thrown everything into it, humanity understood what was coming. They understood exactly what that fleet was carrying and where it was going. They had, Sarek learned later, perhaps 2 hours of warning. And in those 2 hours, the humans did not run. They did not send their own weapon at our homeworlds in return, though Sarek was sure now that they had one, that they had always had one, that they had built it years before and simply never used it. They did not do any of the things a monster does when it is finally cornered. What they did was put every ship they had left between the conquered fleet and the human homeworlds. Every ship. Not to win, they could not win. They were too few, and they knew it. To delay. To buy the people on those worlds time to run, to scatter, to hide their children. The entire remaining human fleet threw itself into the conquered advance as a wall of bodies, knowing it would die, to buy time for songs about home to keep being true a little longer. Sarek was on a boarding ship in the middle of it. He watched the human fleet die. He watched them ram when their weapons were gone. He watched them do things with their ships that no sane pilot would do, spend themselves completely, 40 and 50 at a time, to slow the conquered fleet by minutes. Minutes. They died in their thousands for minutes. And it worked. Not enough, but enough. The conquered fleet got through in the end, torn and bled but through, and it arrived at the first human homeworld with the weapon armed, and the human fleet was gone by then. All of it, every ship, and there was nothing left between that weapon and a world full of the people the songs were about. And the conquered commander gave the order to fire. Sarek stopped. He looked down at the names under the glass for a long, long time. Long enough that Magistrate Ohol started to speak, and then stopped herself. We did not fire, Sarek said. The hall went so still I could hear the machines humming. I could hear my own hearts. The commander gave the order, Sarek said, and the weapons officer did not fire. And do you know why? Nobody moved. Because when the fleet arrived at that world, Sarek said, the humans on it did not fight. There was nothing left to fight with, their fleet was dead. So they did the only thing they had left to do. Across every channel, in every language they could manage, in the conquered tongue they had spent 9 years learning from our prisoners and our dead, the entire human homeworld began to broadcast. Not threats, not pleading. Do you know what they broadcast? I will remember the next thing Sarek Voss said, until the moment I stopped being. They read us our own dead. The hall did not breathe. They read us the names, Sarek said. The names of our dead, 60 million of them, the humans had kept them. Through 9 years of war, every conquered soldier they killed, every ship they broke, every prisoner who died in their hands, they had recorded the names. They had learned to read our script from the tags on our corpses. And when we came to end their world defenseless with nothing left, the humans of that world got on every channel and began in our own language to read us the names of the people we had lost, one after another, our mothers, our sons, the 4,000 of the Talon, Vesa. All of them, a whole world of human voices, reading the conquered dead back to the conquered fleet that had come to kill them, so that the last thing we would hear before we ended them was proof that they had seen us, that they had known, the whole time, exactly who they were killing, that every one of our dead had a name, and the humans knew it and had carried it, and were giving it back. Sarek's clear eye was wet now, the first tears I had seen from him. And we could not fire, he said, a whole fleet of us. We sat there in the dark and we listened to our enemy read us our own dead, and not one soul aboard could give the order to silence them. Because you cannot destroy the only people in the universe who bothered to remember your dead. You cannot. There is not a heart in any body that could do it. The commander wept at his station. Grown soldiers who had fought for 9 years sat in their ships and wept while the names of the people we had lost came in over the dark in human voices. And when the reading finally ended, it took days. 60 million names takes days. When it ended, we turned the fleet around. We took the weapon home, and we sued for peace on their terms, which were merciful, far more merciful than ours would have been, and the war ended. Not because they beat us, because they made us see. That is how the Meridian War ended, not with their weapon, with ours unfired and their voices reading our dead. He set both scarred hands on the head of his hull-metal cane. That is the horrifying truth about human war, Sarek Voss said, to a hall that could not speak. It is not that they do not feel. It is that they feel everything and count everything and remember everything and go to war anyway. And even then, even at war, even with the weapon in their hands, they will not become the thing we were ready to become. We were the ones with the world killer. We were the ones who armed it. We were the monsters of the Meridian War. And the only reason there is still a conquered for me to testify to is that our enemy would not let us finish what we started. They saved us from ourselves. The butchers you were taught to hate carried our wounded and gave us their lifeboats and read us our dead and refused, at the very last, to let us become monsters. And I have let you believe otherwise for 70 years because I was a coward, and the lie was so much easier to live inside than the truth. But I am dying now, and I would rather be hated for the truth. The column glowed green. Every word true, all of it true. I have to tell you what happened next, though I have never known quite how to describe it. There was no sound. That is the thing people never believe. You expect uproar, shouting, argument. There was none. There was a silence so total and so heavy that it had a physical weight, and it went on, and I understood that it was the sound of several hundred people all having the same wall come down inside them at the same moment, and there is no noise you can make when that happens. There is nothing to say. You just sit inside the wreckage of a thing you believed your whole life, and you look at the pieces. Magistrate Ohul was crying. Openly, without hiding it, an old woman in a formal robe with her hand still flat on the table. She had lost someone in the war. I found out later it was her brother at Kellett's Reach, in the same red dust Sarek had described. She had spent her whole life hating the people who killed him, and now she knew that those people had perhaps carried some other wounded soldier home across the killing ground, had sung about their homes, had wept when they died. It is a terrible thing to have your hatred taken from you when you are old, because you have built so much of yourself on top of it, and now the foundation is gone and you are still standing there somehow, and you have to figure out what to do with the rest of your life. I was young. It was almost worse being young, because I had the whole rest of my life to figure out what to do with it, and I had just learned that the thing I hated most in the universe was a mirror. Sarek did not stay for the reaction. He got up slowly with the cane, tapping the floor once to check it was still there, and he walked back across the glass, across the names, toward the door. And as he passed the place where he had been looking all along, he stopped. He stood over one name in the glass, one I could not see from where I was, and he said something to it, so quietly that even the column barely caught it. I have listened to the record 1,000 times. What he said was, "I told them. I finally told them, you can rest now." I think it was Vesa. I have always thought it was Vesa, the girl a human carried home across the killing ground. But I do not actually know, and I have never wanted to find out, because some things should be allowed to stay between a soldier and the dead. He died 11 days later. In his sleep, they said, which after everything is a mercy the war denied to almost everyone he ever knew. The last living memory of what actually happened in the Meridian War, gone, exactly as he'd said it would be, except it was not gone. Because he had put it in the column, and the column keeps everything, and he had said it in front of several hundred witnesses, and one of those witnesses was a young clerk who has now grown old carrying it. They did not change the histories. I want you to know that. That is the part that still sits badly with me all these years later. The recordings we show the children still say butcher. The monster is still in the school books because the monster is useful, because a people needs a dark to point their children away from, and the truth is so much harder to raise a child on. How do you tell a child we were the monsters and our enemy saved us? How do you build a nation on that? You cannot. So they kept the lie, and they filed Sarek's testimony deep in the archive where the 60 million names are, under the glass in the dark, true and buried, the way true things so often are. But it is there. If you ever go to Ossing to the Hall of Records, you can ask for it. Testimony of Sarek Voss, Meridian War, column verified, green the whole way through. They have to give it to you if you ask. It is the law. Most people never ask because most people would rather keep the monster, and I understand them, I do, because the monster lets you off the hook and the truth never will. I am old now, older than he was, and I have spent my whole life trying to decide whether he was right to say it, whether the truth was worth what it cost the people in that hall, worth the hatred he chose over the comfort of the lie. I have gone back and forth. Some days I think he should have taken it to his grave and let us keep our clean, simple war. But then I remember the names. 60 million of them under the glass, and a whole world of human voices that bothered to learn our script off our corpses so they could give those names back to us in the dark. And I think about how the only reason any of us are here at all is that our enemy refused to become what we were ready to become. And I think, no, he was right. Somebody had to remember it true. The humans remembered our dead when we would have burned their children. That is the horrifying truth about their wars, not that they are less than us. That they were more.